So I'd like to welcome everyone to the workshop on the Pleasantview area land use study. My name is Donna Hind, and I'm a partner at the Planning Partnership, and I'm helping the team with anything related to consultation and engagement. I am going to turn it over to Spencer from the City of Hamilton, who's going to make some introductions, talk about the agenda, and we'll get right into the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Donna. So I'd like to join Donna and welcome everybody, and good afternoon. I want to thank everybody for joining us for the Pleasantview Area Land Use Study public information session. Before we do begin, I would like to acknowledge that the City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories. Sorry, I think somebody's...
Yeah, I'm just going to do some muting.
Thanks, Donna.
There you go.
Sorry, thank you. Okay, so before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the City of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas. The land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the City of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our role as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. So with that, I will introduce myself. My name is Spencer Skidmore. I'm a planner with the community planning section in our planning division. I also have with me from the City of Hamilton, my manager, Christine Newbold, who is the manager of community planning in GIS. I also like to acknowledge that Councillor Vanderbeek from Ward 13 is with us today as well, and I'd like to welcome her and thank her for attending. We also have representatives from the consulting team here as well. Donna, you heard from earlier, who introduced herself. And we also have Ron Palmer, who's going to be doing the bulk of the technical presentation. And he's also from the Planning Partnership. And we also have Nick McDonald and Allison Luoma from Meridian Planning here as well. Next slide, please, Donna. Thank you. So I've just included a brief agenda on this slide. So I'm going to start out by going over the purpose of the study and go over some of the timelines for the completion of the study. Then Ron from the Planning Partnership will get into kind of the technical presentation. He's first going to touch on some background information, the study area, some of the historic context, which for this area is quite lengthy, and then some more recent developments from a planning perspective. We'll then pause for a very brief question break related to that material. And then we'll get into, Ron will get into more of the report analysis, which will include going through an analysis of all the relevant planning documents, highlighting or analyzing what they mean in terms of development potential for the area. And we're also going to go through some of the preliminary recommendations of the study as well. And lastly, we're going to wrap up with Donna's going to facilitate a question and commenting period at the end of the presentation. Thank you. So in terms of the purpose of the study, the purpose of this study is by and large to respond to the interim control bylaw that was passed in September of last year by Hamilton City Council, which is also known as bylaw 20186. And what this study also seeks to do is to prepare recommendations for amendments to the rural Hamilton official plan to ensure that it's in conformity with the applicable provincial plans. There's a multitude of provincial policy in effect on this in this study area, and Ron's going to go into some good detail on that later in the presentation. The report also seeks to prepare recommendations for zones and regulations so that the lands can be brought into what's called the comprehensive zoning bylaw for the City of Hamilton, or we also call it zoning bylaw 05200. And through that zoning, we're also going to ensure that the new zoning that gets brought into on the lands is in conformity with the above amendments to the Rural Hamilton Official Plan, and by virtue also in conformity with the applicable provincial policy as well. Next slide, please. So I've just included a timeline on this slide. You'll see right now we're the second from the right where you see it's public engagement webinar. So that's where we are right now. The next step is ultimately bringing a recommendation report, a final report with the implementing zoning and official plan amendments to council in September. I will touch, there are some next steps between now and then that are significant. I'm not going to go into detail on those now. We'll touch on those towards the end of the presentation when I highlight some next steps. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Ron, who's going to go over the technical portion of the presentation.
And I am, just to interject for a second, we're going to go through a few more slides, and then we're going to take our first pause to have some questions of clarification on the material that you've seen so far. So we'll do that a couple of times during the presentation. So over to you, Ron.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Spencer. I'm Ron. Afternoon.
Well, that's what I was trying to tell you to be calm, and I'm going to the other room now.
Here we go. I'm going to just mute. So I'm going to ask everybody just to keep your eye on your mics and make sure you're muted. Thanks so much. Go ahead, Ron.
So we're here today to talk about Pleasantview. I'm sure most of you know where Pleasantview is. It's at the far east end of the former municipality of Dundas. And on the right-hand side of the slide, we have a more detailed shot. Basically, Pleasantview is identified as Highway 6 along the north, about the north boundary, Patterson Road going in a southwesterly direction. Far western edge is Valley Road. About in the center of the study area is the intersection of York Road and Old Guelph Road. Next slide. Within Pleasantview today, it's a host of existing land uses that spreads across quite a large array of uses. We have lots of natural areas being part of the Niagara Escarpment. There are some institutional uses, quite a number of single detached dwellings. Some are out on their own, some are in clusters. We have some park spaces, City of Hamilton. We have some agricultural uses. We have a big hydro corridor going through the area, a rail line at the south end, and we have some existing but limited industrial uses within the area as well. Planning in Pleasantview has been going on for a very, very long time, since 1914 when the original survey was laid out. In the 70s, things started to heat up in terms of provincial activity, starting with the Parkway Belt West Plan in 1973. In 1986, there was an official plan amendment to the Town of Dundas official plan, and that was intended to conform with the Parkway Belt West Plan. A few years later, the Town of Dundas adopted official plan amendment 23. And at that time, a host of development applications were received by the town for residential development of various types. In 1995, both OPA 23 and the various development applications were sent to the Ontario Municipal Board, and that resulted in a number of modifications to OPA 23, and that was implemented into the Town of Dundas official plan through an Ontario Municipal Board order. 98, the Town of Dundas zoning bylaw was amended to bring the bylaw up to date with the official plan amendment 23. And then very importantly, in 2013, the Niagara Escarpment Plan was amended, amendment number 179, which included Pleasantview within the Niagara Escarpment Plan area, and in fact identified very specific policies that applied only to the Pleasantview area. Next slide. This is a copy of the 1914 survey Obviously, it lays out a fairly rigid grid of streets and blocks, which could never be achieved given the interesting topography and its location on the escarpment. So some of those lots actually got built on, but most did not. Next slide. More recently, we heard, we're going to be talking a little bit about development control, and that is a provincial form of development review that would be run by the Niagara Escarpment Commission. And in 2019, the City of Hamilton provided direction to the Niagara Escarpment Commission with respect to support for development control. A little later on in September of 2019, the Niagara Escarpment Commission approved staff recommendations to approve the application of development control within Pleasantview. That has not yet happened. And as Spencer noted, on September 10th of 2020, the interim control bylaw was passed by the City of Hamilton, and that's why we're here today. As I mentioned, lots of things still going on. We started this work in January, and our job is to try and understand the planning context for Pleasantview and bring all of the City of Hamilton planning policies and zoning regulations up to date and in conformity with provincial policy. In March, the Niagara Escarpment Commission is still working towards development control, and they in fact passed a resolution to request that the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry proceed to include Pleasantview in the area of development control and under the jurisdiction of the Niagara Escarpment Commission. Later on in March, a letter was sent by the Niagara Escarpment Commission to the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry requesting that jurisdiction.
Okay, so Ron's now going to go into a chunk of the presentation that'll go through specifically the various pieces of policy. But before he gets into that, I just want to pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions of clarification of what you've heard so far. So we've gone through where the study area is, the existing land uses, the historic context, when Ron went through the timing of some recent planning activities. So I'll take just a couple of questions. So I see, Jeff, you've got your hand up. So if you want to put your...
Yeah, thanks, Donna. Just maybe a little bit more color around the implication of the resolution in March. Like, what does that mean in terms of this process? Like maybe in the frame of what was the alternative to that, and what does that mean going forward in terms of that resolution?
Okay. And I believe that's a question for Spencer.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So Jeff, it was just sorry, I'll put my video on when I'm talking. It was just that the NEC, the commission passed a resolution, meaning that they provided or were providing direction and correspondence to the minister to include the lands into development control. So really it's just an indication that the NEC is actively pursuing and requesting from the minister that these lands be included within development control. So the act in of itself doesn't place the lands in development control, but it's just kind of an indication that the NEC still is actively pursuing these lands to be added to development control.
Okay, that's helpful. So to me, I'm playing that back. It sounds like that they're signaling their alignment that they seek, like that the NEC is putting up their thumb saying like, okay, we're good here, that we would like to have purview over this.
Oh boy.
Correct. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other questions of clarification on just those past few slides? Okay. Oh, sorry, I see a hand up and it just says iPhone. Sorry, do you want to go ahead? So I don't have a name to call out. It's just named as iPhone. Okay, so Ron, you, let me just do one more time to ask them to unmute. No, okay, Ron,
No.
you go. Oh, there you go.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
I can, yep, all good.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, okay. Oh, my name's Ingrid, by the way. My name is up on the chart, but for some reason it comes up as iPhone.
Okay.
Because I'm not familiar with some of the terms you're using, I'm not sure if area of development control regulation means stricter controls or easing of controls. Like I'm sort of confused on, it's been a little bit hard to do much with the land over the last few years. Is this going to change it so that landowners will have more flexibility?
Okay, that's great, Ingrid. And I just
Thanks.
renamed you to Ingrid. So
Okay,
I think
thanks.
that's maybe for you. Do you want to just provide a quick clarification? Then we're going to get on with the rest of it, the rest of the presentation. Go ahead, Spencer. Is it stricter control or easing control?
Yeah, Ingrid, I guess the short answer would be there's not going it's not necessarily an easing or a more stricter control. It's just who is the approval authority for those controls. So right now, which Ron is going to get into, so this might be a little premature, but right now we're updating our planning instruments to be in conformity with the Niagara Escarpment Plan, so that any planning decisions would be consistent with and conform to the Niagara Escarpment Plan. If they were placed under development control, the city would no longer be the development approval authority. The Niagara Escarpment Commission, through a development permit issuance, would then be the development approval authority. So that's the distinction. There's not necessarily a more strict or more loose development control, but it's just who approves that development.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you.
Spencer.
No problem.
Okay, Ron, back over to you. So I'm going to go to the first in the series of slides on policy.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about provincial policies first. And as I mentioned earlier, this has been going on for about 45 years. And the policies have not been getting looser over time. So it's important to note that all of these policies cover a whole host of topics, but tend to end up at the same place. We have multi-jurisdictional policies from different ministries at the provincial government. And generally, when there are a multiplicity and multi-jurisdictional elements to policy, the province wants us to implement the most specific policies or the most restrictive policies that are out there in the provincial planning framework. What's really important is that the City of Hamilton and their planning instruments in the official plan and in the zoning bylaw are required to conform with provincial policies. And conformity is a very significant test. And it really means that you have to very carefully implement what the provincial policy framework is telling you. And before I go to the next slide, I am going to say I'm going to have one exception to the conformity test. So next slide, please. Provincial policy statement, which is new. It was most recently updated in 2020, in the spring of 2020. And the difference here is the municipality does not have to conform with the provincial policy, but it has to be consistent with the provincial policy. That's a very minor nuance, but an important one. The provincial policy statement is a province-wide policy framework, and it really identifies that Pleasantview is a rural area, and it is to remain rural. It also identifies that natural heritage features and all of their associated ecological functions shall be protected. And that's a very important principle of provincial planning in Ontario. Moving to the next slide. The Parkway Belt West Plan, this is an oldie, but a goodie. 1978 is the plan that we've been looking at. And it identified Pleasantview as a protected area for various infrastructure elements, it also was intended to protect the escarpment and preserve the existing character. In that plan, some further development was permitted, but it required significant study to ensure the character and functionality of all of those natural features was enhanced or maintained. Next slide. The Niagara Escarpment Plan was updated in 2017, and it includes very specific policies that deal only with Pleasantview. There are a number of development criteria in sections 2.2.1 through 2.2.12 that deal with a host of development issues, but fundamentally, section 2.2.21 is specific to Pleasantview. And it really talks about controlling development relatively significantly. It does permit existing development, depending on the timeframes as to when it was built. And it also permits new single detached dwellings only on lots, vacant lots that are 10 hectares or greater. This is a carryover from the Town of Dundas Official Plan Amendment 23 and that Ontario Municipal Board order that I mentioned earlier. The Niagara Escarpment Plan does provide some direction with respect to accessory uses and accessory buildings when an existing single detached dwelling can be replaced. And it talks about a whole host of very site-specific parts of Pleasantview that have specific policies that apply only to those sites. So when I said a few minutes ago that typically the most specific and the most restrictive policy framework will apply, the Niagara Escarpment Plan provides both a very restrictive and a very specific policy framework for Pleasantview. Next slide. The Greenbelt Plan, a 2017 update, identifies Pleasantview as part of the natural heritage system, and it adds further protections to areas that fall within the Niagara Escarpment Plan area. Again, we hear the words ecosystem, features, functions, all very important elements of the Niagara Escarpment, and important that provincial policy is in place to protect those. It also identifies park elements, some of which already exist in Pleasantview, and promoting opportunities for recreation, tourism, and of course the appreciation of the tremendous natural heritage elements of Pleasantview. Currently, the province is in the process of expanding the Greenbelt area. However, Pleasantview is already within the Greenbelt and under the jurisdiction of the Greenbelt. Growth plan is next. Growth plan, another new update in 2019. And the growth plan recognizes the Niagara Escarpment and talks about it as the most significant ecological and hydrological natural environment and scenic landscape in this province. Pleasantview is identified as within a rural area, and it is not intended to accommodate substantial growth. And it's also within the Greenbelt and is part of the growth plan natural heritage system. There are policies that link the growth plan back to the Greenbelt Plan and the Niagara Escarpment Plan. Next slide. In addition to the provincial policy framework, we also have an evolving local policy framework that starts with the town of Dundas and finds its way into both the rural Hamilton official plan and hopefully in the future into the City of Hamilton zoning bylaw. But today, where we are is we're still under the jurisdiction of both the rural Hamilton official plan and the former town of Dundas official plan and the former town of Dundas zoning bylaw. Next slide.
So I do see hands up, but I am going to wait until the end. Ron's got just a couple more slides to go, and then we'll finish the presentation and we'll pause for the discussion. So
The
there you go,
rural
Ron.
official plan contains a very specific policy that deals with Pleasantview. It's called Special Policy Area A, Pleasantview. And it basically refers back to the policy framework from the former Town of Dundas official plan and that 1995 Ontario Municipal Board order. It also directs the City of Hamilton to undertake future studies and prepare policies ensuring conformity with applicable provincial plans and policies. And that's fundamentally what we are doing in this exercise in response to the interim control bylaw. Next slide. So in the former Town of Dundas official plan amendment 23 and the OMB order that still applies here in Pleasantview, the implemented versions of those talk about no new single detached dwellings after August 93, except on lots with a minimum area of 10 hectares. You'll remember that number because that number shows up in the Niagara Escarpment Plan specific policy for Pleasantview. Cluster forms of development were also prohibited, and that led to the refusal of several of the development applications that were before the board at that time. So where we are today in all of this multiplicity of planning policy is that each time planning policy is updated, it's trying to conform with historic elements or new elements as the province's policy framework evolves. It's complicated, but hopefully through this process, at least the City of Hamilton planning policy framework and zoning bylaw will be specifically in conformity with fundamentally the Niagara Escarpment Plan. Next slide. We had the city's GIS department look for all the vacant lands within Pleasantview that were over 10 hectares in size. And they found 7 lots. 4 of those lots are already owned by the public agencies, including the City of Hamilton. So there are only 3 lots of over 10 hectares which have the ability to develop a new single detached house in all of Pleasantview. So at this point, the development potential is substantially limited in Pleasantview. Next, I'm getting into our 3 recommendations. And our first recommendation is that we will be preparing, and the city should implement, an official plan amendment that adjusts Special Policy Area A in the Rural Hamilton Official Plan to be in explicit conformity with the Niagara Escarpment Plan. And that will then put all of the appropriate policies into the City of Hamilton Rural Official Plan and not have to refer back to the former Dundas Official Plan. This amendment will ensure conformity with the policies of the Niagara Escarpment Plan. Next slide. Our second recommendation is about the zoning bylaw. And as I mentioned before, the current zoning is in the Town of Dundas zoning bylaw. And it was established following the OPA 23 and the Ontario Municipal Board order. So we're recommending that through this planning process, that the city bring the Pleasantview area into the city's current comprehensive zoning bylaw, but that the new zoning will generally carry forward the existing zoning established back in 98, 99, and based on the OMB decision, and implement the Niagara Escarpment Special Policy Provision 179. So that was Niagara Escarpment Plan Amendment 179, which is now identified as Section 2.2.21 of the Niagara Escarpment Plan. And any other relevant policies that we need to bring forward will be identified and included in the new zoning bylaw. The final recommendation, recommendation 3, is that the City of Hamilton staff continue to work with the Niagara Escarpment Commission to bring Pleasantview into the development control purview of the Niagara Escarpment Commission, and that would require a modification to Ontario Regulation 826. This is not an activity of the City of Hamilton, it is an activity of the Niagara Escarpment Commission, but it's important that the City of Hamilton and the Niagara Escarpment Commission staff continue to work together to achieve that objective. And that's where we are.
Okay.
today.
Thanks, Ron. So that is the end of the information that we were sharing on the call. So I see Rashni has a hand up, and then I will go down through my list of participants and call your name out by your first name and give you a second to turn your camera and audio on if you'd wish. So Rashni, you go ahead with your question.
Sure. Hi there. I have a question about the growth plan map. And I think that's the same map as map 6 on your report. And I was just confused around some parts of it are in white. And I think the legend indicates that's the Greater Golden Horseshoe Growth Plan area. So that was a little confusing to me why those are in white. Because
So you're referring to where my cursor is, if people can see on the
right,
screen.
I thought it was
These
not
3 areas.
Mm-hmm.
So Ron, is that it? That's a question for you, Ron?
Yep.
So let's just give Ron a second. You're just getting the, or Spencer, I'm not sure if you have.
Yeah, I can
Legend.
answer that one. I do understand why there is some confusion there. Essentially, what that underlay is showing is that although these lands are not within, they're not really governed by the growth plan because they're not urban lands, they're in the rural area, so they're governed by the Greenbelt. What that underlay is showing is just that they're within the Greater Golden Horseshoe or the growth plan area. So it's a bit confusing, I understand, but it's just showing that they are within that plan area, even though they're governed by the Greenbelt.
I see. Okay. I just, want to make sure that it's clearly indicated they're not intended to accommodate more development.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
But I do understand where that it can be a bit confusing and that it's some of the intricacies of the policy, but it is just to show that it is in the plan area, but it is indeed governed by the Greenbelt and the Niagara Escarpment Plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to our summary of the recommendations and just leave that on the screen, and you can see the little key map in there for point of reference. So we go down through the list, and again, you don't have to turn your mic or camera on if you don't have questions to ask. So I've got Margaret. And I think your mic is on, Margaret, but not sure if you have a question. I'm not hearing anything. Then I have a couple of phones on my list, so I'll give you a chance if you want to unmute yourself if you have questions. So the phone that ends in 6228. And then I have a phone that ends in 5008. And then I have a phone that ends in 3122. Next, I'm going to keep going down through my list. So I have a Janet. And then Ben. Brian. And then Carolyn. or Kathy.
Oh, is that how you do it?
Yeah.
So is that you, Brian? Do you have a question?
Just go ahead. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I was trying to figure out how to signal that I had a question. I have just a point, and then I have a specific question. The one
Okay.
point is, I'd like to point out that on map 1, there was very good detailing of public agency ownership, but it seemed to my eye that there was one omission.
So map 1 that you're referring to, Brian, are you referring to a map in the report?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. So map
Okay.
one in the report,
Yeah.
there were a number of public agency held lands denoted with a label, the Cartwright North, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there's a piece of land at the northeast corner of Valley Road and York Road, which
Okay.
formerly owned by Bellacourt, the builders, and is now owned by the Royal Botanical Gardens.
Okay.
And that is not, as it stands now, it's just there as a open parcel, but it's not denoted as such consistently with the other pieces that are denoted as publicly.
Okay. So you're just letting us know that we should go back and double check the ownership.
Yeah,
And
just
so where my cursor is the northeast corner of Valley and York, you're saying in here that it's owned
right
by
in there.
the RBG. Okay.
Yeah. And there is some, similar to what how the Hopkins tract is labeled, there is some kind of label on that within the RBG naming, but I can't tell you what it is.
Okay.
I wish I could, but it escapes me right now. I've heard it once said out loud, and I forget what it is. It
Okay.
might be Cartwright West. I'm not 100% sure, but something in that vein.
Okay. And then what was your other question?
So the question that I would like to ask, and I'm wondering, well, one thing I would like to say to the plan developer and writer of this, so this would be to the two agencies that put this together. I thought the document was very well done. It was clearly written, and it was comprehensive and had a lot of really interesting background and boiling down a lot of complex planning documents. So that is very much appreciated. I was wondering if the issue of 711 York Road was something that was considered by the planners. This has been something that's been very hot locally over the last year, particularly in the context or the outfall context of the development on 10 Newman Road, which did not have the 25-acre requirement, and that structure has been.
So it's a question, you want some, a little bit of background on what's happening with
711
at 711.
and specifically following from that, there was also a very significant issue over the winter period around an easement roadway that was built to cross 711 and to be able to access the property at 715 York Road.
Okay, so lots of detail there. Let me try and break it down a little bit. Maybe Spencer, this sounds like it's a question for you, background on that. A property at 711 York Road, and specifically the easement that was created or planned or anticipated.
Yeah, I can address that. First, Brian, thank you for your comments on the report. I think the property you're talking about is Berry Track South for the RBG.
That's it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we did identify that, I think, in the text, but I'll update that figure so that we have that updated in the figure too. So it's very easy to distinguish. In terms of 711 York Road, we're looking at revising the zoning across all of Pleasantview right now. And we have the goal of updating that zoning so that it's, as Ron mentioned, the zoning will reflect the official plan amendment to the Rural Hamilton official plan, which will reflect the Niagara Escarpment plan's special provisions for this area, So we are looking at doing the specific zoning instruments, we call them, or the zoning bylaw, and the official plan instruments, the official plan amendment bylaw. We're working on that, and we are looking at all zoning categories to make sure that it does conform with the Niagara Escarpment Plan.
Okay. Thanks,
That's very
Spencer.
helpful. Could I have a follow-up
Sure, Brian. Just
question to that?
Yeah.
The 7-Eleven is relatively straightforward because it doesn't conform with the Niagara Escarpment Plan. It doesn't meet the OMB mandated 10 hectare requirement, and the NEC has gone on record saying that no development can occur there. The more confusing piece is this easement road, or the easement and the roadway over the easement, because that was done under a committee of adjustment decision. And again, I'm just wondering, I think it would be helpful for the community if the planners or the consultants to the planning department took a hard look at that from a logic perspective. And I believe the requirements mandated by the committee of adjustment were not fully met. And kind of from our, as a community observer, we're looking at this and we're kind of thinking this roadway should not have been built. And again, I don't know if that's really had a hard planning
Brian.
legal look at. So I'll just leave
Let
that
me
at
ask-
something.
Okay, let me ask Spencer, do you want to just weigh in on that, the easement of the road one last time?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Brian.
Okay.
So I will say, Brian, that easements are, it's not things that we're looking at controlling through this study. We're looking at changing the zoning, so the permissions on what you can do in terms of land uses, and the Rural Hamilton official plan policy that's attributed and that's in effect in the area. We aren't looking at reviewing or modifying easements through this study. It's kind of outside of the scope of the study. So that's kind of the comment I can offer on that.
And is there another avenue that Brian should be pursuing then, Spencer? Because it sounds like it's a concern of the community that
it's definitely that's something I'm happy to follow up with you, Brian, and we can have a discussion offline.
Okay, perfect.
About kind of what some of the potential avenues or who in the city may be able to help you with your concerns, or
okay,
and I can take that on offline with you.
Perfect. Thanks, Spencer. Okay, Ingrid, I do see your hand up. I'm going to go down in alphabetical order by my list of participants, and I'll get to you in just a few more people. So okay. I think I left off at Kathy, and then I have somebody that I think is C. Campbell, making that up, and then Cheryl.
Or is it? I do have a question.
There you go, Cheryl. Yep, go ahead.
I would also appreciate hearing more about what other avenues residents of Pleasantview might be able to take to address concerns about the Committee of Adjustment decision regarding that easement road, because
okay.
it continues to be perplexing and a bit baffling to me that the roadway was allowed, and yet there may be no purpose for which it could be used. So that's
okay.
a mystery, and I'd love to hear more information offered to all of us so that we could follow that up if we wish. And doesn't mean you need to do that today by in this call, Spencer, but if there's another avenue that can be offered either by a follow-up email or in the local newspapers so that we can read more about that, I would really appreciate that. And I also wondered, I appreciate also the presentation and the clarity of the information that's been given to us. Thank you. And I wonder whether the matter of Columbia College, whether their application is going to be mentioned at all. I mean, I know I can understand from what you've said that probably this is outside of the purview of what the scope of your work, and yet I think that their application will be impacted potentially by the decisions that come out of this process.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Cheryl. So I think on the easement thing, Spencer was really clear that do a follow-up call with probably whoever is interested. So I'll leave that to Spencer to sort that out following these conversations today. But a question on Columbia College. Spencer, is that for you? The development application? And
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a good question. So as I'm sure you're aware, the Columbia College, there is an active application at the Niagara Escarpment Commission for a Niagara Escarpment Plan amendment. And as I'm sure you're aware, that's outside of our jurisdiction. So what would need to occur they would need an amendment to the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and we're not the approval authority, so it's outside of our scope. And then there would need to be additional planning approvals at the municipal level after, if they were successful in getting a Niagara Escarpment Plan amendment. So it's not something that because it's outside of the jurisdiction and the decision-making authority of the city, it's not something that we considered in this report.
okay, thanks, Spencer. All right, now I'm going to go down to Heather. And then not seeing Mike coming on. So there you go, Ingrid, your turn.
Okay, again, I'm sorry I'm not familiar with some of the terminology, but I'm hoping other people are on the same boat as I am. Just so that you're clear why I'm asking this question, when I look at that map, I see urban type areas and I see rural areas. Like I don't see a complete rural picture. I see a lot of homes in certain areas. I happen to own 3 lots on a street that has about 10 homes one way, 10 homes the other way. And for some reason, it was decided that we could not build anything on those lots yet. It's like building a mall and saying every store can be open except one store on this little corner. So we're on behalf of my family, what does it mean when you say urbanization should not occur? What constitutes urban? And how is it how would we proceed with trying to get this addressed? Because I don't want to waste everyone's time on it, but maybe other people have lots on streets with many homes on it. Yeah, so it's more
Okay.
What is urban?
Let me, I think maybe this is a question for Ron. Yep, there you go.
I'll start with a high level
Okay.
explanation. Urban development is typically development that is within a defined settlement area and is provided with full urban municipal services, sewer and water facilities. And in terms of where Pleasantview sits, is that it's not within a settlement area. And my understanding is the developments may have municipal water, but they do not have municipal sewer services. So it is defined as rural. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, this is covered by a multiplicity of provincial policy that has been ongoing since the early 70s. And it's been pretty clear all the way through that urban forms of development are not appropriate here in Pleasantview. And the current state of affairs, as you know, is in order to build a new home on a lot, the lot has to be at least 10 hectares. So that's
even if, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but even if there's already homes built on that very same street, that still applies, right?
That's correct. And that comes from starting with OPA 23 and the OMB decision, and then followed up by the Niagara Escarpment Plan. So in order for you to begin any process that might result in development on your 3 lots would start with an amendment to the Niagara Escarpment Plan.
And that would mean contacting the Niagara Escarpment developers, or how does
it's the Niagara Escarpment Commission?
Okay, commission. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Okay, thanks for the question, Ingrid.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm going to keep going down through my list. So then I have Janet and Jeff and Amanda. There you go, Jeff and Amanda.
Yeah, no, we were just going to wait. It sounds like we're coming towards the end. I guess the question that we have is, so it looks like you guys are recommending that this transition to the NEC, the NEC looks like they're willing to accept the responsibility of planning. Can you give us the sense of how long is that transition going to take before NEC would be willing to see building permits?
Spencer, is that a question for you?
Yeah, I can provide an answer, but unfortunately, Jeff, it's not going to be a very good one. So the transition of, or the inclusion of the lands in development control needs to be done by the province through a Ontario regulation amendment. And that typically it's initiated by a minister's order. So unfortunately, I can't give you a timeline because we're not at the driver's seat in terms of driving that initiative. That would be something that would have to come from the province to include the lands in development control. But as we mentioned previously, the NEC is supportive of that initiative. But unfortunately, the timing is undetermined at this time.
And what's our mechanism, as taxpayers and voters, what is our mechanism to push the appropriate MPP or minister so that they actually don't sit on this file?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the process, it would just to be, well, there's a couple ways. You can obviously send a letter to your MPP, whoever represents this area of, I'm not sure who it is for this area of Pleasantview, which addresses your concerns and shows your support for the inclusion of the NEC or of development control. And the other thing is, once the process is started, they will be posting on the environmental registry website, and there's typically a 30 or 45-day commenting period. So once that process has started, typically there's some kind of notice, and then there's a posting on a provincial website, and you can provide comments through that posting on that website.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Let me keep going. So then I have Jennifer. And then Mamuna. I have M. Stone. Ola. Prince. Now, Rashni, you had a question earlier on. Not sure if you have another question about the recommendations. I'll just leave it to you. Yep, there you go. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have another question, and it has to do with the existing lots of record. I know this issue has come up over the years, and repeatedly the city has reminded whoever that development is not permitted on existing lots of record in Pleasantview because of the concerns for the septic tank. So I was just a little bit uncertain. I'm pretty sure I understand, but wanted clarification in Appendix C, where there's excerpts from the Niagara Escarpment Plan. On page 42, it says development is permitted only on an existing lot of record, etc. And then later on in section 21, it says special provisions for Pleasantview survey lands, and that they're subject to additional special provisions, notwithstanding the permitted uses and definitions for lot, existing lot of record, etc. The only things that apply are, before February 93, and single dwellings that existed on or before August 98. So I just want to make absolutely sure that I'm understanding that you're understanding there's no development permitted on existing lots of record.
So I see Ron's got his camera on. Go ahead, Ron.
Thanks.
I believe you have interpreted that correctly. The first part is under section 2.2 in the general development criteria, where it identifies existing lots of record. But then the more specific policies that just apply to Pleasantview further refine that to say specific existing lots of record that are over 10 hectares in size. So development is only permitted on existing lots of record that are greater than 10 hectares in size.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rajni. Then I have Rob. And then Sarah.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead,
Hi.
Sarah.
I did have a couple of questions, actually. One is just related to a point that was raised earlier about the environmental registry.
Okay.
Whether there was any way that a notice could be sent out to the email listserv for this sort of group when that is posted.
Okay, so Spencer, do you have any, I think you were talking about that in relation to other agencies. Does the city have any role in?
Yeah. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for the question. Are you on our email list by chance?
I am, yeah.
Okay. So what we can do is, I know the NEC has also committed to posting a notice on their website when the ERO goes live for commenting. What I can do is I can try and stay in touch with my colleagues at the NEC. And then when I become aware of the ERO posting, as Donna mentioned, it's a provincial authority, so we're not in charge of posting the ERO notice. But when it does go live, I can send an email out to the mailing list, or to yourself specifically, Sarah, if you'd like, just to notify you. But I know that the NEC has committed to updating their website. So I would check back periodically on the NEC website, because they will be updating with a notice when the ERO goes live.
Great. Yeah, I think it would just be something that would be easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. And so if there is any way that this list could be, or if the NEC had a list that we could join, anyway. So that was one point. The other was about the collaboration between, say, the city and the NEC around infrastructure projects. So I'm thinking particularly about the water main project that was initially planned to sort of go through Pleasantview, but I don't know whether that's, I mean, they sort of called it off, and I don't know whether it was because of this or whether it was because they have an alternate route. But I'm just wondering whether that changes the approvals for those kinds of processes, as well as specifically development of lots.
Spencer, that's probably for you again.
Hi, Sarah. We did not consider that specific EA that you're speaking about. What I can do is I can reach out to some colleagues internally to see what is going on with that process. I will say that the NEC does comment on all of the city's environmental assessments. So if there is a class environmental assessment going on that's in the plan area, the NEC typically does comment on them, and they will comment on whether or not that EA and that work meets the policies of their plan. So there is definitely some collaboration with that respect.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Spencer. Just a few more. I have Selena and Tim. Oh, Selena, do you lose Selena? Just give it a second. And then Tim, and then Tom. I do want to, just before we wrap up, I am interested to know, just and so everybody can understand who else has been on the call, whether you live in Pleasantview or not, just to give us a bit of an idea.
Can you hear 5008 now?
I can, and I'll get to you in just 1 second. I can hear you now.
I do have a question, that's why. Go
okay,
ahead, sorry.
Perfect. So I'll just give this a just another couple of seconds whether you live in Pleasantview. So it's
I live in Pleasantview.
okay. So we're just doing a quick poll. Okay, so I'm going to end that and I will share it so everyone can see it. So there you go. 60%, almost 60% live in Pleasantview, and we've got a little over 40 that don't. So I'm going to stop sharing that now. And I see your hand up, Cheryl, and I'm going to go to the phone, the person who just phoned in or just unmuted their phone. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Suzette Kennedy. I live on Patterson Road. And just a couple of quick questions that may or may not be for this entire thing. We've noticed a drop in water pressure. Old Guelph Road is still broken down to one lane, wondering if that's ever going to get fixed. And we've got a real safety issue. And the reason I bring these things up that seem a little off topic is because I no longer know who's in charge to help with the difficulties that are going on in the area, be it traffic. I know the city put in a three-way stop, and people just run it. Patterson Road's become a highway, and it's getting quite dangerous. And as much as I've complained and begged and literally now have had a fight with the police, they're too busy to worry about Patterson Road. And I don't know what help I can get from the city to sort of get things addressed, because if you put a school in and you're talking about 1,000 buses, when there's an accident, people use Patterson, of course, and I have absolutely no problem with people using the road, provided they follow the speed limit. Somebody's going to get killed.
Okay, so let me see. So a couple of questions there, and maybe Spencer, you'll have to help with this. The question about concerns about changes in the level of service, like water pressure dropping off. So that's one on the infrastructure. And then the other question about traffic. So can you
it's dropped to 33%, just barely meets provincial standards from 60, and it was at 75 before. And the city came out and measured it and laughed, because what my husband does or did for a living, we have better equipment, and their equipment matched ours exactly. The drop off is crazy.
Okay, so let me see what Spencer, can you give some direction on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, the kind of the issues you identified aren't necessarily in the purview of this study. So me personally, there's nothing I can do in terms of road safety and the water pressure through this study. What I can do, and I don't think I caught your name.
It's Kennedy.
Sorry?
Suzette Kennedy. Okay.
Well, Suzette, if you want to give me a call, there is a slide in here. You won't be able to see it because you're calling in.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. If I'm not sure if you received the postcard, but it has my contact information on it. If you want to give me a call, what I can do is I can help connect you with other staff departments who are in charge of those areas that you have concerns with. And we can see if we can address some of your concerns that way, if that sounds good.
Sure.
Perfect. Okay. And then Cheryl, I saw you had your hand up and then it was put down.
Sorry. Can I just really quickly, are all these maps going to be online? Can I, when I get home, go online and see all the maps? I've taken great notes. I'd just like to put all the maps to what you've spoken of.
Absolutely. Yeah. All the whole PowerPoint slide will be uploaded onto our project website. So you'll see everything that you listen to.
And the recording as well. So you get the conversation too.
Thank you so much. I totally appreciate it.
Okay, Suzette, thanks.
Thank you.
So Cheryl, I saw you had your hand up. It's down now. Do you still have a question?
I wasn't sure if you were monitoring the chat, and I noted that Selena had said she'd unmuted her mic, but I see that Spencer's responded. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions of clarification or questions about the presentation? We have just one slide that I'm going to wrap up with on. Carolyn, do you want to go ahead? I see your hand is up.
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, this is more a comment rather than a question.
Okay.
And first, I want to say that the presentation is beautifully put together. Anybody that lives in Pleasantview is really blessed. It is a spectacular area. As a wildlife lover and a photographer, I have been just amazed, absolutely amazed at the flora and fauna in this area. It is so worth protecting. It is a huge gem to Hamilton, something that should be guarded at every avenue. 7-Eleven and 10 Newman are perfect examples of why the NEC needs to have full jurisdiction. It is an extraordinarily important wildlife corridor that has been jeopardized for 4 years. It's just starting to restore. It hasn't been fully amended, but it is starting to restore. The animals are starting to use it again. Just as the recovery was in place, 7-Eleven happened across the street. It happens to be the other side of this very integral corridor. And so that illegal build happened over 4 years, a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty, who owned what, how should we proceed? And it became very clear that we need the NEC to be the overseer and the muscle behind all this. This is not the only corridor that's critical. There are several within this area that makes it safer passage for the wildlife, not super safe because the roads are busy, but much safer. We've encouraged beautiful birds, migratory birds, and beautiful wildlife to this area. It is our responsibility to ensure safe passage and make sure that the corridors that have been in place for proper wildlife movement are there forever. If they're jeopardized, excuse me, it means a human hazard, it means more roadkill, and the animals have to find an alternate route, which brings them in backyards and onto city streets. So I can't stress enough from what we've witnessed up here and the fights we've fought for 40 years that we need NEC protection. We need the muscle behind. And if you look at, there was a little comment here about site alteration should not be permitted unless it has been demonstrated that there will be no negative impacts on several features: wetlands, woodlands, valleys, wildlife habitat, natural areas, heritage. We have them all. We have them all up here in Pleasantview. We house the whole list. So I just can't stress enough that how important it is to get this whole envelope under one jurisdiction.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks for those thoughts, Carolyn. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Anybody else on the call? You can just unmute yourself. I just want to make sure that everybody has the chance to ask their questions before we wrap up. It's just coming up on 2:15, so we've got a little bit of time. So I don't want anyone to feel like they're rushed and haven't had a chance to ask their questions of anybody on the team, the city, or the planning consultants. Okay, I'm going to share my screen one last time just so Spencer can speak to the next steps. So Spencer, if you can turn your camera back on. There we go.
Awesome, thanks, Donna. So I've included this slide just which goes over some of the next steps in the process. So from now until July 14th, we're accepting feedback on the draft report, which is posted on the project website under the documents and reports section. You can provide comments either by phone or by emailing me. My contact info will be on the next slide that we'll switch to in just a moment. Once we receive that feedback, we'll incorporate it and finalize the report. We'll also be working kind of in tandem to finalize the zoning bylaw and official plan amendments that implement the recommendations of the study. Those will also be posted on the website, the project webpage, sometime in July once those are complete. I would encourage all those who have interest in reviewing kind of the technical official plan and zoning documents to join our mailing list, because I will be sending out an email once those are uploaded on the project webpage so people know they're up there for review. And then once we get the final report and the zoning bylaw and official plan amendments finalized as well, we were targeting bringing a report and the planning instruments to planning committee and ultimately to council in September of this year. So that's kind of a highlight of the next steps. And yep, so this is just the next slide. You'll see once again my contact info. My contact info was also on the postcards that were sent out, both my email and my phone number. So that's the best way to provide comments, is to call me or shoot me an email. And then we've also included the link or the URL to the project webpage. And as I mentioned before, if you email me and join the mailing list, I will be updating that project webpage as the project progresses. So with that, just want to thank everybody for taking the time, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. So again, thanks for carving out a little bit of time. The session this evening is exactly the same presentation. So keep an eye on the project webpage to see the recordings. So I will end the meeting on everyone's behalf. Thank you very much.